It's a good page. We had we've been talking about the Torah service, and we've kind of gotten up through the point where we're calling up 7 people for aliyot, and there's being called up to the Torah and having blessings. So on Shabbat, it's 7. We call up 7 people. So we've got Pesach coming up. So we'll have Yom Tov services on Sunday and Monday. And so for Yom Tov, we have 5 aliyot. So we'll call up 5 for that. Yom Kippur, there are 6. Rosh Chodesh, there are 4. Weekdays, there are 3. So, and all of this, and I think we saw this, was explained in the Mishnah, where, you know, which days get how many people called, or how many readers from the Torah portion.
Rabbi, pardon me, but would you teach me again what aliyot?
Okay. The term aliyah
yeah.
refers to let's say on Shabbat morning, there are 7 aliyot. So we call up 7 people by their name to read from the Torah. And if that person doesn't happen to know that particular reading, which nowadays is the case, we have somebody else does the actual reading, but the person who is called up by name to receive the aliyah, that's the person that says the bracha for receiving an aliyah.
I think it was, thank you, but there was something that you said, well, you think aliyah is—
yeah, the word aliyah itself. So the word aliyah means to go up. And we, you know, to make aliyah is like to move to Israel, right? And we think, oh, aliyah, we're going up to the bima, it's a big honor. That's actually not why it's called an aliyah, at least originally, although that's, you know, these are really nice things. But the term that is used in the Talmud is oleh leminyan, which means is included to be counted in the minyan.
Oh, yeah, right.
Right. So an aliyah is one of the 7 people who make up, you know, the 7 who are make up the number of Torah readings.
So what's the difference between 7 and 10 for minyan as a concept of?
Well, so minyan just means count. Right. So moneh is to count something, right? To enumerate something. So on Shabbat, we have, you know, the count for Torah reading is 7. On Yom Kippur, the count is 6, right, etc. When we talk about the count needed to make a quorum, for that we need 10. So it's a different minyan.
And quorum for Kaddish, I mean.
Right. Yeah. So anything that's a davar shebikdusha, words that are in holiness, right? So certain parts of the service are considered to be kind of public declarations of the holiness of God's name. And so for those parts of the service, we need to do that in public, right? Because of a passage that says, you know, in God's name is declared holy in the assemblage of peoples, right? And so the word is edah. So the question is, well, what does edah mean, right? So what does it take to make an edah, which is an assembly, right? And so then midrashically, the rabbis look at the Torah and they find that with the incidents of the spies, there is a reference about ha'edah hara'ah hazot, this wicked edah, this wicked congregation, right? So how many spies were there that provoked such anger? 10, right? So by doing that, by analogy, we're able to say, the number for edah, that's 10, right? But, you know, and again, always keep in mind what the deeper message might be, right? So whether this is the actual origin of 10 for a quorum, I don't know. I suspect that this might be a better origin for why 10, but the significance is that the sin of the spies, right, introducing doubt into God's ability to bring the Israelites into the promised land, and then the people following them and panicking, that's what leads to 40 years in the wilderness, right? It's not the sin of the golden calf. It's the sin of the spies and the people going along with them, right? So that sin, that lack of faith, can be overcome by a congregation of Jews gathering together to pray, right?
For some reason, I
Anytime we
always
make a minyan to pray, we are undoing, right? We're let's say, yeah, we're undoing the sin of the spies.
Interesting. Yeah, I always thought there was a correlation between the 10 commandments and a quorum, or the
10 is a
com-
great number, you know, it's so convenient.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. But it's not a dozen, you know.
It's not a dozen, exactly.
Would you mind saying the word again? That was aliyah, aliyah,
Oh,
but
Ola
that isn't
minyan.
aliyah. Excuse me, I'm going to write it down. So
Yeah.
ola, like okay, ola.
Ola means to ascend, to go up.
Oh.
No question about that. It's just that it's an expression, right? You know, that way,
Okay.
when you combine it with minyan, it just means it's included in the count.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have finished our 7 aliyot. Whenever we finish a section of our service, we need to we mark that liturgically with a kaddish. So we saw this earlier. At the end of Psukei de Zimra, right before Baruch Hu, we have a Chatzi Kaddish. At the end of Shacharit, right after the Amidah, before the Torah service, we have a Kaddish Shalem. Here, now that we have finished the 7 kind of required Torah readings for Shabbat, again, we need a Kaddish, right? In this case, it's going to be a Chatzi Kaddish. So I don't want to go through in detail everything about the Kaddish, but it's just to point out again that because the reading of Torah is it's in public reading the word of God, so we need a minyan for that. Of course, we also need the minyan to say the Kaddish, so these things certainly go together. And I think we've spoken as well in the past about there not being a consistent rule about whether to stand or sit for the Kaddish. Different communities do different things, but there actually is no halacha one way or the other. At Sinai, what I tend to actually not announce anything before the Kaddish because different people have different things they like to do, except, you know, I always keep in mind that teaching the Maharal, who kind of explored this topic and basically came to the conclusion that, you know, some people stand, some people sit, whatever, do whatever your community does. But to me, it seems right to keep whatever position you happen to have been in immediately prior to the saying of the Kaddish. Right? So that's the approach I tend to take when announcing, you know, please be seated or please rise, except for this Kaddish. So for this one, I do ask the congregation to stand, because this Kaddish is really, it's about giving honor to the Torah, to the word of God, which we have just completed reading. And so for that, I invite the congregation to rise. So then we say the Kaddish, and then immediately after that, well, not necessarily immediately. After the Kaddish, we have, on Shabbat, we need to call up somebody else. So who do we have to call up?
Gelilah.
Isn't it usually the person who's going to read the Haftarah?
Right, exactly. So we call
yes.
up the person who's going to chant Haftarah, right? We call him the maftir. Maftir, Haftarah are the same word in Hebrew. Poter is to kind of complete something or close something. So the Haftarah is a noun, the kind of the closing. Maftir is a verb, the one who closes. So it's kind of the same word. So we would call that person up after the Kaddish, because as a way of indicating that this is separate, right? The maftir is not a halachically mandatory part of the service. Reading Torah is, Haftarah is not. And so we indicate that with the Chatzi Kaddish, which we just chanted. All right. So Chatzi Kaddish, we call up the maftir. The maftir has a short aliyah. Usually it's just the repetition of the last 3 to 5 verses of the Torah portion. on some occasions, and we're going to be doing a lot of this in the coming couple of weeks, we bring out more than one Torah, and we have a maftir reading from a different section of the Torah, right? So on really every day of Yom Tov for Pesach, we're going to take out 2 Torahs, right? One is going to be the reading for the day with 5 aliyot, and the second Torah will be from the book of Numbers, and it will be the maftir reading, and probably around 5 verses or something. So that'll be each day of the festival. So in that case, right now we're on a page that says Hagbahah and Gelilah. Hagbahah is lifting, Gelilah means rolling, and so this part of the service, for each Torah, we have to have somebody do the Hagbahah and the Gelilah, the lifting and the rolling of the Torah. So when you've got 2 Torahs, or even on a couple times a year, we can have up to 3 Torahs. The logistics of when to do all these things can get a little bit complicated. It always confuses the Gabbaim. It confuses the rabbi also. So we have to kind of review the exact order of when each thing happens. But in essence, we have kind of this is a ritualized putting away of the Torah, or at least covering up of the Torah, putting it back into its garments. So we would call up, let's say on a normal Shabbat, we would call up the maftir. They would have their aliyah. The Torah reader would read the short reading. The maftir would say the closing blessing, and then we would call up Hagbahah and Gelilah. So Ya'amod or Ta'amod, Hamagbiyah or Hamagbiha, which is the lifter, and then Ya'amod or Ta'amod, Golel or Golelat. Golel is to roll something, right? The roller. All right, so then they would come up, and you've all seen this before. Somebody lifts up the Torah nice and high. The goal is to show 3 columns. At least just to show up at least 3 columns. This idea of showing 10 columns, which we have certain members who are quite strong and with a rather wide wingspan. Not necessary. We just need 3 columns. And the idea is that we're showing the congregation what we just read from, right? That what we've just completed, in fact, this is the Torah. This is the word of God that you've just heard being read. And so what do we say? Susan, you had a question?
You're on mute.
All right, you're on mute.
The time the students have is the problem. Oh.
I was saying I didn't want to stop you on a roll, but now I've made a whole big polygon, but how do we do that in the Sephardic?
In Sephardic, they do it before the Torah reading. And there you wouldn't have a separate person, right? Because the Sephardi Sefer Torah is not, it's in a wooden case that just kind of opens up like a cabinet. So you can't have a separate person doing Hagbahah and Gelilah. So there, the name of the honor is Gelilah, which is actually the original name of the honor, because what are you doing is you're rolling the Torah closed, you're rolling it back into position. So what they do there is before the Torah reading, someone would kind of pick up, would hold the Torah just kind of in, like at their chest, show the congregation, and then they'd set it down on the table to read from it.
So they turn it around.
Yeah. So somebody has to pick it up, but obviously they're not holding it way up above their heads. They're just kind of holding it here. Let me, there we go.
And since it's a circle, they
were just going to hold it at chest level, just like this, right? So it opens in half. And so you're going to see about 3 columns if it's opened up fully. Let's see. Maybe
I guess I didn't realize that.
I
guess I thought it was all in one side and then just a thing that they pulled out. So I'm wrong about how it works.
When we went to the Karaite service, they did the same thing.
Really?
What kind of service was that, Michael?
Karaites? There's a Karaite congregation up near San Francisco.
Okay,
They immigrated from Egypt.
I see.
All right, I'm trying to quickly find a picture. Or-
So Mike, did their Torah look like a Sephardic Torah, as near as you could tell, like the
Yes.
case and everything?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so all right, so
Yeah.
something
Oh.
like this.
Oh, ho, 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 ho.
Okay, so what do we see is, yeah, it's a case. And if this person were to close the case, let's see what other images they've given us here. There you can
Oh
see
my gosh, I had no idea.
another example like that. And these are Ashkenazi, you can see the difference between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi
Right.
way of holding up the Torah scroll.
Hmm.
So, so this is a Sephardi Torah, it's a fancy one, where it's closed, right? So it's basically, it's a cylinder that's split in the middle and has a hinge on the backside and then can be opened up. Right, so there you can see the cylinder and there you can see it opened up.
So is it that middle portion, that's what's being read?
Yeah, so you
Okay.
have the middle portion being read and there's like a little, you can turn the tops and you basically can roll it back and, from one side to the other side. And when a Sephardi Torah is being read, it's sitting on a table. So it's vertical,
Wow.
right? As opposed to an Ashkenazi Torah where the Torah is horizontal, lying down on the table. Sephardi Torah, here, let's see. Here, this is a good example.
Oh, yeah.
There you can see it's
Yeah.
just sitting there on the table and reading from the scroll as it's opened.
Being
Is he
vertically
turning it from the bottom or the top?
Yeah, there's like little ways to kind of turn it, like handles or something. Like, it's been a while since I've read from a Sephardi Torah scroll.
As long as we're on this subject, does their print look the same? Are there sofas? Do they?
So the script is a little different. I mean, there are different Torah calligraphy scripts. I'm not knowledgeable enough to be able to tell you what the differences are, but I'll say that there are thousands of detailed rules about the formations of the letters. And Sofrim need to master them all. And there are different, I guess you would call them fonts for different communities. So there's certainly Sephardi font, and then there are even different Ashkenazi fonts. There's kind of a more Hasidic and a less Hasidic. So, and then if you look historically at some ancient scrolls, you'll see other variations as well in terms of font.
If you were visiting someplace and they want to give you an honor and they called you up, would you be able to read it?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's
Okay.
the difference is not.
Right.
It's clearly the same alphabet, right? It's not this. It's not like reading Rashi script, right? Which is a completely different font.
Okay.
Right.
Rabbi, is there any kind of explanation or philosophical idea of why they have it vertically instead of horizontally?
I don't know of one, but what I can tell you is this.
Closer to God.
There was a debate in the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, about what the proper position of a mezuzah was. Right? So should it be horizontal or should it be vertical? right? And so there was a big argument, and it turned out that it was the argument ended up between being someone who was more Ashkenazi and between someone who was more Sephardi, and they each were claiming that the mezuzah need to be correspond to the position at which we read Torah, since the mezuzah is kind of like a mini Torah.
Mm.
In so much, right? You're putting the word of God on your doorpost. It's like, you know, parts of the Torah. So it would make sense to put the Torah up there in the same position that we read from it, right? But of course, they had a different frame of reference for how you read from it, and so the end result was to compromise by putting it at an angle. And you'll hear this drash given not infrequently at weddings, right? Because the couple needs to, it's important to be able to hear both sides and to reach compromise, right? Just like the mezuzah, which is representative of the home that you're building together. So, sure.
It's interesting because Persians put it vertical. They don't.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, they don't put it.
Well, now you know why.
They're stubborn.
I would think you are closer to God if you have it closer to your face.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I don't know the origin of why it's done one way versus the other way.
So when we do Ashkenazi Hagbahah and we lift up the Torah and the congregation is getting out their seat and pointing it at the Torah, why do we do that?
Okay, well, that's a good segue. All right. We've called up the Hagbahah and Gelilah. Notice, by the way, the word is Hagbahah.
Yeah.
Hagbah is not a word, right? Hagbahah, Gelilah is the proper conjugation of that word. Or you could have a magbiah or a magbihah. A magbiah, or the AH on the end, would be for male. Magbihah would be female. And that would mean the lifter, right? The one who lifts. Okay, so what do we say? Person lifts up the Torah, the congregation is standing. If this is a regular Shabbat, we're still standing from having just, no, we're not. If this is a holiday, we are still standing from having just said the Chatzi Kaddish. You don't have to worry about that. But what do we sing? Torah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai beyad Moshe. All right, so this is one line. So where does this line come from? Right now, we've seen a lot of passages throughout the Torah service as having biblical origins. Some from the Torah, some from Psalms or prophets. Sometimes they're taken out of context. Sometimes they're completely taken out of context. So our first text that we're going to look at is Numbers 9:23. And so this is describing how the Israelites would go through the wilderness. And, you know, if you remember earlier, we saw at the beginning of the Torah service, they're bringing the ark with them. And it's leading them through the wilderness, and kind of God's presence in the form of a pillar of fire or smoke is going out in front of them to lead them, and then it'll come to rest wherever it wants them to rest. So that's what this seems to be describing. So what does it say? Al pi Adonai yachanu, al pi Adonai yisa'u, right? On a sign from the Lord. Literally, P is the mouth. At the word of the Lord, they will camp, and at the word of the Lord, they will travel. Et mishmeret Adonai shamaru, al pi Adonai biad Moshe, right? So the mandates of the Lord they kept. Al pi Adonai biad Moshe, by the mouth of the Lord, by the hand of Moses, is literally how you would say that. You're saying at the Lord's bidding through Moses, right? To say at the mouth of someone is saying, you know, when they tell you to do it, right? Or at their instruction somehow. So, but the expression, al pi Adonai biad Moshe, that comes from here. And it has to do with the Israelites following God's will in terms of directions in the wilderness, right? And we saw earlier that kind of travel motif, the traveling of Israel through the wilderness, is really a paradigm for the beginning and the end of the Torah service, right? When they open the ark is like the ark that they were carrying to the wilderness. And so this is consistent with what we've already seen in terms of some of the precedents that are being used for the ritual here. All right. So what about the other part of the word? V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael. So this is from Deuteronomy 4:4, word for word, right? This is the teaching that Moses set before the Israelites, placed before the Israelites. So what have we done with this prayer that accompanies the lifting of the Torah is we've made a mashup of two verses. Right? And by doing so, we have created an entirely different meaning altogether, right? What is Zot HaTorah in Deuteronomy? It doesn't mean the 5 books of Moses. It doesn't mean the physical book. It means instruction,
the next
right?
onto San Antonio Road.
All right. This is the instruction that that Moses gave to the Israelites, right? That's what it means. It's not referring to a particular book or anything like that. But what have we done? Zot HaTorah. This is the Torah. So when we do this in synagogue, it's like we're pointing this thing that this person is lifting up and showing us. This is the Torah, the very same one that Moses gave to the children of Israel in the wilderness. And what is it about this Torah? What's so special about it? Al pi Adonai biad Moshe. It was given by God's mouth through the hand of Moses, right? What does it say in Exodus is that God spoke and Moses wrote down everything that God said. And of course, that's referring to the second set of the 10 commandments, right? But we've really taken these 2 verses completely out of their context and created a different kind of story that is being told here. So what's the message that it says in the context of our Torah service is that we've just finished reading from the text. And in the Ashkenazi ritual, we're about to put it away. And we as a congregation are affirming that what we've just studied and what we've just read is the same Torah that God gave to Moses, that Moses wrote down and gave to the Israelites in the wilderness. And we are reading from the same text today. Right? So it's a theological statement about the veracity of the Torah. And Max, you were asking about why, people, hold up their tzitzit, or some people, point with a pinky finger. I've seen a lot of different explanations. It's not really clear to me where that particular tradition came from. I've heard for the pinky, it's a sign of humility because it's the littlest finger. So I don't know. But the idea is Zot HaTorah, this is the Torah, the idea that we should be facing it, pointing it, acknowledging it in some way. That seems to make sense to me. Any other thoughts or kind of reactions to experiencing this moment in shul?
I'm shocked by what you just said, because I just always thought that and I've always gone, yes, this is like, the beginning of the Pirkei Avot, or this is the Torah that was given to Moses, then to Joshua, then blah, 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 and then to the elders. And so I always thought, okay, this is absolutely the beginning right here. This is that Torah. God gave it, that line.
No, but that's right. That's what it means, right? When we say this, that's exactly what it means. Right?
Well, that's what that means, but we made it up.
Yeah. So, this is the very creative use of scripture by whoever, and I don't know who it was, but whoever put this part of the service together, they creatively and very selectively, used, picked out verses that were able to say what they wanted them to say. Okay, all right. Any other questions or comments on this? So in the Ashkenazi service, after the person lifts it, then we would usually help that person sit down, and then the Gabayim would then bring over the accoutrements to the person with Gelilah, and then that person would really roll the Torah closed, help them kind of roll it, close it tight, and then put all of the the belt on and the rest of it. And then you'll see different practices at different synagogues in terms of what to do with the Torah next. Some synagogues, you'll have somebody that will, they'll just stay sitting there holding the Torah for the rest of the Torah service. Some synagogues will have like a stand somewhere on the bima to put the Torah on. At Sinai, and this was the practice at Sinai since before I got there, so I don't know how long it goes back. The custom is to put the Torah on dressed back on the reading table, where it'll remain until the end of the Torah service when we put it away.
So the way that we combine two verses, it's not unique to this. We saw it at the beginning of the Torah service where we went from Moses in the desert to Jerusalem. We see it with Ad Hashem Malech, Melech Malach Yimloch.
Yeah, this is very, very and by the way, this is what Midrash does, right? So this is Midrash's bread and butter, to take passages out of context, to read them in different ways, to mash up two verses that have absolutely nothing to do with each other as a way to gain insight or even new meaning. So, I would say that whoever does this in our Siddur is in very good company in Jewish tradition. And that idea of mashing up brings us to the Haftarah. So you may have heard the origin of the Haftarah being that at a certain point in Jewish history, the reading of Torah was banned. And so as a way to get around it, not to get around it, but to do something, they would read Haftarah instead. So there is no evidence of that at all. I'm not even sure there's any evidence of any period of time when reading of Torah was banned in that way that's being described. The Haftarah is something different. What the Haftarah really is it's an opportunity to do a mashup, to take whatever the Torah reading was that we just did, and to put it in proximity to another passage, another section from the prophets, from the Nevi'im, because all Haftarot are from the book of the prophets, and to juxtapose them. And it's a way of providing a commentary on a theme that was dealt with in the Torah portion. Now, sometimes it's just a kind of a continuation of a similar theme. So you'll have, they're talking about, we're in Genesis and it's talking about, Esau and things like that. And so then we have a Haftarah that is talking about the nation that came from Esau, Edom. And so there's kind of an obvious connection that it draws. Sometimes, though, the Haftarah ends up providing what I would call a counter narrative to the Torah portion. And so the best example of that is the Haftarah on Yom Kippur, where after saying all these prayers, which are highlighting the ritual of the day, and we're fasting and we're beating our chests and doing all of these things, we then read a Haftarah which completely undermines all of the ritual and says, is this the fast that the Lord wants? Does God really want all your sacrifices? No, God wants you to break off the chains of the imprisoned, to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, et cetera, right? Which completely undermines everything we've been doing in our service. But from a pretty early age, that was identified as the Haftarah for Yom Kippur. And it says a very important message to us who are gathered to worship, is that the prayers are not enough, right? So the Haftarah, I think from Isaiah, is speaking in a temple time, but here we are not in a temple time. And it's telling us that when we get out of synagogue and it's no longer Yom Kippur, we have a lot of work to do. And that is at least as important as all the ritual that we're doing. And if our behavior towards those, really it's describing those who are most marginalized in society, if our behavior to them is not proper, then God doesn't accept any of the ritual that we're performing. So I think it's a powerful message. And so I like to think about the all of the Haftarot as in some way providing a commentary on the Torah portion. Now, there are some times when the Haftarah is not a direct commentary on the Torah portion, but on something to do with the calendar, right? So it's not based on the weekly reading, it's based on where we happen to be in the cycle. And so that's been the case as we've been getting ready for Pesach, where we've had several special Shabbatot, which have special Haftarot that are connected with kind of getting ready for Pesach. Mike, looks like you have a question or a comment.
When were the Haftarot set down as
Yes.
being for that particular parasha?
Excellent question. Well, first of all, keep in mind that the whole system of Torah portions was also not consistent, right? So in the land of Israel, in the first centuries after the destruction, there was not a consistent cycle. So it would take 3 to 3.5 years. And it seemed to be that different communities would be at different places in that cycle. They weren't unified. And we also saw that there seems to be some flexibility in the Torah reading about where a reader starts and stops. So I would guess that there might be some flexibility in terms of what is being chanted from, and that a given reader chanting Haftarah may be able to pick what they want to read, right? When we saw that passage from the New Testament where Jesus shows up in shul on Shabbos and is given maftir and he chants from Isaiah, right? I mean, I almost get the sense that he picked out the section he wanted to read, right? And he had flexibility in doing that, right? So we see in the Talmud, we see discussions for particular holidays, the specific Torah portion and Haftarah that needs to be read, but that has to do with the holiday, not
Prepare to keep right after Haftarah.
Not the weekly Torah portion. So I would say the Haftarah we have today are clearly Babylonian, because the annual system of Torah reading is from Babylonia, and I think we may see it in Masechet Sofrim, a discussion of the Haftarot. I could be wrong about that though. So probably sometime in the Middle Ages,
After 1,000 feet,
it started
keep
to
right
be
onto
locked in.
US 101 northbound.
Somebody's got a GPS.
Someone's got a GPS on.
That's Joan.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Keep right.
So Rabbi,
And even today, if you look at in the Chumash, you'll see that there are different traditions between Sephardim and Ashkenazim for some weeks. So sometimes there is a different Haftarah, or usually in the case of the Sephardim, you might have a Haftarah that is a little shorter than the Ashkenazi version of the Haftarah.
in the congregations that do a 3-year cycle, like I think Beth David did or does, what do they do? Divide the Haftarah into 3 parts?
No, they do the full Haftarah.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Do you ever do a drash based on the Haftarah as well, or is it?
Oh, yeah,
always-
sometimes I'll reference the Haftarah. Yeah, I mean, not as often, but
Yeah.
certainly on occasion. But
For me, when I listen to the Haftarah, I'm just tuned into the trope and how beautiful it is as compared to what we've just heard from Torah trope. But I don't hone into its relationship to the Torah.
yeah, I think the Haftarah is a bit more minor than the Torah.
It is, but it's still more melodic.
Yeah. Okay, so Haftarah. The maftir Haftarah, we talked about that being really the same root. We have a blessing before the Haftarah. Just as we had the blessing before the Torah readings, we have a blessing before and after the Haftarah readings. So what does this blessing say? Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, Asher Bachar B'Nevi'im Tomim, who chose good prophets, right? Or really who chose among the good prophets, let's say. V'ratzah b'divreihem, hane'emarim be'emet, and was pleased with their words, that were spoken in truth. Blessed are you, Adonai, habocher b'Torah, who chooses the Torah, uv Moshe Avdo, and his servant Moses, uv Yisrael Amo, and in Israel his people, uvin vi'eh ha'emet v'tzedek, and in the prophets of truth and righteousness. All right, so what's the theme here, themes in this opening bracha?
God chose us.
Yeah. Choosing truth.
Prophets.
All right, so choosing, and if you remember the Torah blessings, also asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'nat, right? We also have this idea of choosing us and giving us the Torah, right? Those were the themes in the Torah blessings. Here we have a very similar pattern, right? But here, it's the emphasis, really, the thing that's added is choosing the prophets specifically, and we get an emphasis in the first and the second part of it that what the prophets are saying is true, right? Their words are valid, right? Now we know from reading the Bible that there were lots and lots of prophets
in 2 miles.
in ancient Israel. All right. There were lots of prophets in ancient Israel, and not all of them were true. In fact, most of them were false prophets, right? But so there were true prophets, and the true prophets were the ones whose words ended up being in the Tanakh, that we included in our canon, and so that's what we've selected from the Haftarah. So this is introducing what is about to be said as being from the prophets, as being officially approved by God, right? So it's kind of preparing us to hear these words. Just as the Torah is true, the words of the prophets are also true. Now, when this is chanted, it's chanted using Torah trope. Using Haftarah trope. It doesn't have its own separate melody. Trope notes have been applied to this. I want to share something that I learned when I was in rabbinical school, which has to do with the very last word in this paragraph. So we have vatzedek, uvin vi'eh ha'emet vatzedek. So there we have that. Vatzedek is now in blue. All right. Nivi'eh is the prophets of. Ha'emet means the truth. So this is really the prophets of the truth, or in prophets of the truth. Vatzedek, and righteousness. And this grammatically should not be vatzedek. It should be v'hatzedek. And in Sephardi Siddurim, this is exactly what you find. V'hatzedek instead of vatzedek. It's a small little thing, but credit to Rabbi Miles Kahn. So and the prophets of the truth and of the righteousness. So something. I'm not sure if it means that much differently, but we're giving validity to the prophets through this bracha. And it's something that's very important as well, is that the authority of the prophets stems from Moses. And that's something that's very important theologically, which is that Moses is the first and the greatest of the prophets, and all later valid prophets are kind of prophesizing kind of through the legitimacy of Moses. And then, of course, when there are no more prophets and the rabbis have taken over, the rabbis claim that mantle as well, that our authority ultimately stems from Moshe, who we refer to not necessarily as Moshe as the first and greatest prophet, but we refer to him as what? Moshe Rabbeinu, our rabbi. Right? So, all right, so then we chant the Haftarah, and then after the Haftarah, we get not one blessing, but 4 blessings. All right. So question for us to keep in mind, why so many blessings? Why do we have to spend so much? The Torah portion did not have a very long blessing after the Torah reading. It was short. The Haftarah had a short blessing at the beginning. Why do we need so much blessings after the Haftarah? So keep that question in mind as we look at them one at a time. So this is the first blessing after the after the Haftarah. Here, when we chant this, it does not have the same melody as the Haftarah chanting. It's got its own melody, right? So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol hadorot, ha'el haneman ha'omer ve'oseh, etc. Sherry, how does that sound musically?
It sounds minor.
Does
It
it?
sounds, well, it sounds, yeah, it sounds slightly minor, but it's, I think it's really beautiful. I think
Shekol
it-
Rav Emed Vatzedek. Is that minor?
No, that part's major.
Feels more major.
Yeah.
What's going on is the musically it's shifting back into something that's closer to the more major royal-ish musical style of the rest of the Torah service, right? So they go, right?
Oh yeah, that's very, yeah,
That's very major. That was at the very beginning of the
exactly.
Torah
That's why the
service,
beginning sounds minor.
So that's what's going on musically here. So what do we say? Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, rock of all eternity, righteous in all generations, the faithful God who says and does, who speaks and fulfills, for all of his words are true and righteous. Emet vatzedek, right? Sound familiar? Faithful one, Ne'eman, you are he, Adonai our God, and faithful are your words, and not one word of your words will return unfulfilled, for you are a faithful and merciful God King. That's what I
Sounds like a
was-
tongue twister.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. El Melech, which is like God King. That really should be a faithful and merciful God and King, but there's no and there. So, blessed are you, Adonai, the faithful God in all his words. All right, what is the theme here?
Faithfulness of God.
Right, God is faithful with a real strong focus on the things God says. The things God says will be fulfilled. Why is this the first blessing after the Haftarah?
Because we just read from the prophets.
Okay, and
Yes.
That-
It's expected that we take them seriously.
okay,
And that they've just been prophesizing, and here we say, all of these words will come true.
yes, they're prophesied, right? So many of the prophets are predicting, in the days to come, right? God is going to do X, Y, and Z, right? So here, even though we don't mention anything in this prayer about the prophets, right? The word prophet doesn't appear, but we're saying that the words of the prophets are true and they will be fulfilled.
Well, it seems close to where we were before. We were talking about the faithfulness of God and the truth of the prophets before the bracha, and this one symmetrically reaffirms that. And I think
Right.
the other ones go further afield. So it makes sense to get this one done first.
It makes us get this. Okay, right. So,
But this one doesn't feel like it's talking about the prophets. It feels to me like it's still back at God.
well, yeah. So it's really interesting that it's we don't mention the prophets, right? We don't
Right. So
mention them by
how do you
name.
interpret that as the words of
Because I would
prophets
say that.
versus
So what
God?
is the idea? The idea of the prophet is that the prophet channels the word of God. That when the prophet speaks, it's really God speaking,
Okay.
right? I think that's what's going on with this blessing. Although I don't see why they couldn't have said the word prophet somewhere in this blessing, but this is the prayer we have. All right, let's see what comes next.
Rabbi, don't they at the very bottom, the last paragraph of that?
Oh,
bracha?
this is just the first paragraph.
Oh, yeah, but I
We've
mean.
got 4
the-
paragraphs to deal with.
Yeah.
All right. Here's paragraph number 2. Have compassion on Zion, for it is the house of our lives. To the miserable soul, quickly save it in our days. Blessed are you, Adonai, who causes Zion to rejoice in her children. By the way, in our Siddur, we're on 147. Different translation. But, I tend to go with the more literal translation. But all right, what's the theme here?
That we need to be saved
All
and we
right.
need to live out the word of God and the word of the prophets.
this prayer particularly, just this paragraph, what's right? And for a clue for the summary, always look to the chatima, the closing blessing, Misamech Tzion bevaneha, right? Who causes Zion to rejoice in her children. Right? So what is this prayer about?
The getting Jerusalem back.
Yeah, returning to the promised land, right? In gathering of the exiles. By the way, Misamech Tzion bevaneha, does that bracha sound familiar at all to anybody? Yeah. This is one of the Sheva brachot, right? So at a wedding, right? Under the chuppah, this is one of the blessings that are said before the bride and the groom. Misamech Tzion bevaneha. There's a prayer at a wedding also to praying for the restoration of Zion and the return of the Jewish people to Zion. Kind of
I don't
interesting.
see the connection between the Chatima and the rest of it.
Well, because restore, have compassion on Zion, right? Because it's ours, right? This is where we belong, right? La luvat nefesh, to the miserable soul, we need to be saved, right? So this is the language of a people in exile longing to return to Zion. And so, but that's going to take God restoring Israel to Zion, right? This is standard fare.
Zion is personified here as being able to rejoice.
Oh yeah, that's very common.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen this theme all over the place, right? I mean, this is in the
Well,
Amidah.
the people Israel are going to rejoice in their children. It's that Zion is going to rejoice in her children, which would be us.
Well, Zion will rejoice when her children are returned to her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
What does this have to do with the Haftarah?
Nothing.
Nothing? That'd be my answer.
The miserable soul.
Let's look at the next one. Samchenu, we have Sameach again, joy, right? Cause us to rejoice, Adonai our God, in Elijah the prophet, your servant, and in the kingdom of the house of David, your Messiah. Quickly may he come, that our hearts may rejoice. Upon his throne may no stranger be seated, and may others no longer inherit his glory. For by your holy name you swore that his flame will not be extinguished for all eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, shield of David. All right, what is this theme?
The Davidic dynasty will continue.
Or be restored, right? This is Messiah, right? Right. So the previous one was Zion, and now we've got the Messiah, right? Mashiach coming, right?
And these are
So
promises of God.
This is we've seen this before, right? This is the story of the Amidah, right? Towards the end of the Amidah, we saw these exact same themes dealt with. We see these themes in Birkat Hamazon, quite common in Jewish prayer. What does it have to do with Haftarah?
It does mention a prophet.
Yeah, we open with Elijah.
Maybe. And yeah, you've got some Haftarot that deal with the restoration of Zion and that maybe deal with David, but not all of them, right? This, again, my answer to this one would be nothing. And now we've got the fourth one. All right. Al Torah v'al ha'avodah, right? For the Torah and for the avodah, for the worship and for the prophets. There, at least we mentioned the prophets. And for this Sabbath day. Oh, by the way, let's back up a second. This is where the Haftarah ends on if we're on a Chol HaMoed or Rosh Chodesh. We don't continue on. On Shabbat or on a festival, we've got one more paragraph, right? And so this is the version of it on Shabbat. Festival just adds the words for the festival, right? So for the Torah and for the worship and for the prophets and for this Sabbath day that you have given us, Adonai our God, for holiness and for rest, for glory and for splendor. For everything, Adonai our God, we gratefully acknowledge you and we bless you. May your name be blessed in the mouths of all the living, always and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, who sanctifies the Sabbath, right? Baruch Ata Hashem Mikadesh HaShabbat. Does that bracha sound familiar? From what?
Kiddush.
It's Kiddush, yes. And one other thing.
It's in the Amidah.
It's the Amidah, right? This is the middle blessing of the Amidah on Shabbat for both Shacharit well, for every Amidah on Shabbat, right? Mekadesh HaShabbat. So what's the theme of this paragraph?
The day.
It's the day,
Thanking
right?
God
We're
for the day.
sanctifying the day. On festivals, we do the exact same thing, but with the blessing for festivals, and it's the same one that's done for the kiddush for festivals, and right. So, what does it have to do with the Haftarah? We mentioned the Nevi'im, but I'm not sure that this has anything to do with the Haftarah either, right? So
You're asking us trick questions.
that's a trick question, right? Well, you should see a theme here, right? The first blessing does seem to be talking about the Haftarah, right? It's talking, the affirmation of God's words as always coming true, right? And so that is referring to prophecy. 2, 3, and 4 don't seem to have anything to do with the Haftarah, right? So what are they doing here?
Why
We
do
just
we?
finished all of our ritual text study.
Okay.
And it seems like a good time to get all of these last thoughts out.
These are core beliefs.
Okay. Right. And this is all standard fare, right? So on Shabbat, everything that we've just mentioned here are things that have appeared in other prayers. So one suggestion was that this goes back really old. And if you remember when we were studying the formation of the service, and especially the formation of the Amidah, we had some proto versions of the Amidah, right? Before we kind of settled on this kind of 19 blessing formula that, for weekdays, or 7 blessings on Shabbat, there were other things that preceded that until eventually the rabbis, after the destruction of the temple, shortly after the destruction of the temple, came up with this set liturgy of prayers that made up for the Amidah. But this seems to be very similar, right? This seems to also cover a lot of those same themes. So one suggestion is that this, in fact, was kind of like a proto-Amidah as well, and was done after the Torah service. And so as we saw in, when we looked at Masechet Sofrim, when we saw the Torah service there, we just kind of had a series of blessings and prayers that kind of were presented one after another. So the suggestion is that that's what happened here as well, is that we had some blessings that kind of were fit into the service after the Torah reading was done. And then at some point, because they were right after the Haftarah, they got attached to the blessing that was recited after the Haftarah. And then we kind of forgot where they came from. And so now what do we have is we have a 4-paragraph, right, a 4-blessing cycle right after the Haftarah that, that we torture our B'nai Mitzvah students to learn. So
Yeah, really, honestly. Isn't this where in the service that a lot of people get up and go chit chat in the back?
Usually they do that for at the beginning of the Haftarah.
So I have a question. Remember how we talked about with the prayers, some of them were if people arrived late.
Mm-hmm.
So is this a way for people to hear these themes even if they arrived late?
That's an interesting idea. It sounds plausible. It sounds plausible. Although when the rabbis get their hands on it, I mean, they do talk about obligation, right? That there is an individual obligation to say certain prayers, like to say the Amidah. So if a person came really late, they would still need to daven the Amidah on their own. Although I suppose that if somebody didn't know how to, didn't have the ability to do that and didn't have a Siddur, maybe they wouldn't be able to. So they'd need something like this. Yeah.
Rabbi,
I think it's amazing why really, every time I think about it, why the blessing on the Torah is so short. I mean, the before and after, and for the Haftarah is about 5-6 times lengthier.
Exactly.
Right. It makes this explanation, it makes a lot more sense. I think, but it's so.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I just wondered, since we mentioned Elijah and we're just about to sing to him, could you just mention a few words about him? Like, why is he so special? Like, why do we stop the
What's so
Seder
special
and
about Elijah?
open the door and all that
Yeah.
stuff?
Open the door and he never comes. Yeah.
And he never drinks. But anyway,
I never drink.
Yeah. And, he drinks at my table, not yours.
oh, I'm not at mine, sorry.
Oh, you're special, Rabbi.
Yeah, no, you know, the cup always goes down a little bit, right?
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Elijah. So and Elijah is very much associated with Pesach. But so who is Elijah? Elijah was this crazy prophet in the first temple, or early prophet. Did all sorts of wild things, and is said, well, when he doesn't really die. He just kind of like goes up on a chariot, right? The image I have is like he rides up on a Harley into the sky, and goes to heaven. And so lots of legends developed around Elijah, that he's still wandering the earth, and that his job is to announce the coming of when it's time for the Messiah to come. Elijah is going to reveal himself and announce the Messiah. That's his job. But in the meantime, he's hidden. And so anybody you meet could potentially be Elijah, right? So be careful. And so there's all these stories that developed, and a lot of Jewish folklore is centered on Elijah, as you know, he's often like a beggar, and he encounters people and then performs miracles for them, all sorts of things like that. But Elijah's there, and he's waiting for the moment. And so we introduce Elijah into a lot of parts of our annual cycle, right? So think about, at the end of Shabbat, we ask for, we sing about Elijah, right? Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishbi, the Tishbite, Hagiladi, the Giladite, Bimhera V'yameinu Yavo Elenu, right? Quickly or soon in our day, come to us. Im Mashiach ben David, right? With the Messiah, son of David, right? So that's what that's what the song means, right? We're asking, Elijah's here. We want him to come, and we want him to bring Mashiach along with him. So Shabbat, which is like a taste of the world to come, right? So we're saying, Elijah, we want this week. Maybe you'll come this week, right? Or at a Brit Milah, right? It's this moment of hope and potential of a new child, right? So Elijah, maybe this child could be the Mashiach, right? Or at Pesach. So when do we invoke Elijah during Pesach?
Towards the
At the
end.
end.
Yeah, what's going on?
I don't know what's going on.
Next year in Jerusalem?
Before then?
Dinner.
It's after dinner.
After dinner.
After dinner, right.
Yeah. So we
It's the last
open our
couple of
doors.
Yeah.
And what do we say?
Come on in.
No, we say Shvoch Chamatcha, right? Pour out your wrath on the generations that did not know you. Right?
Oh,
So this, I'll read it for you.
Yeah, we forgot. We better remember before
was
this
he a
week.
real person?
Right. Here's I'll read it. It says, pour out your fury on the nations that do not know you, upon the kingdoms that do not invoke your name, for they have devoured Jacob and desolated his home. Pour out your wrath on them. May your blazing anger overtake them. Pursue them in wrath and destroy them from under the heavens of Adonai. That's what we say when we open the door for Elijah.
Really? I didn't know that.
Why? There's a good reason for it. Why are you opening your door?
I don't know.
I thought it was to
Let us-
welcome the Mashiach.
Well, that's sort of the opposite of the Passover night, the original Passover night, where you
Yeah.
But-
So we open our door to make sure that there are no dead babies that have been planted on our
Oh
doorstep.
my God. I never knew that.
didn't-
Really?
That's
Well,
not why you opened your door?
What do you mean?
So this tradition developed in the Middle Ages in Europe as a response to the blood libels.
Oh,
So this is actually a relatively later addition to the Seder, and the spring season. Historically, this is a time when there was a lot of anti-Semitism. You got the Passion plays. This is kind of blood libel season, and so what is the classic? The classic lie is that Jews kill a Christian baby to bake its blood into matzah, right?
right.
So this was a dangerous time for Jewish communities, and so what do? They open the door to make sure that they haven't been framed, right?
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
so what do we do at this moment, right? So this is kind of a symbolic moment of, and so those verses are read, right? These really violent verses, right? These angry verses saying, God, pour out your wrath on these nations that are causing our suffering, and so that's the same moment when we invoke Elijah, right? Who is the one that is going to herald the end of that suffering, right? The coming of the Messiah.
So we ask God to swear and do all this wrath stuff, not Elijah.
No, yeah, well, Elijah has a different job. Yeah.
Now, was he a real human being that we have other evidence from?
We're talking about a really long time ago, right? So we don't have we don't have Elijah's like bronze baby shoes or anything like that. So,
In the present Hagbahah, say from the JTS, is that the paragraph that's in there for Elijah?
absolutely.
It just seems to me that and maybe it's because, we keep collecting modern Haggadot, and so they're universal themes of acceptance and love and freeing people from bondage, and that seems to be the whole message. You even forgetting about our holiday that we were saved, it's going to be a call to save everybody, and we have to go forward to save people. This is just a shock to me.
That's very modern.
I agree, Susan.
Yeah.
This is shocking.
That's very modern to the
well,
universal
that's why I'm asking.
approach.
Well,
Extremely
that's
modern.
why I'm asking you that in the most modern conservative Haggadah, is that there would be something like this in it?
So
surprising.
what other song is often sung around this time?
Give me a hint.
I'll give you the answer. Anima Amin.
Well, what we
Sing
do?
it? Can you sing it?
Anima Amin, right? Anima Amin, Anima Amin. Right? So this it's I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, and even though he delays, I will await the day of his coming. Right. So it's a kind of a summary of one of Maimonides' 12th principle of faith. But that particular song is said to have been sung during very dark times, during the Holocaust, as an expression of hope, right? And even in the darkest times, we still have faith that in the coming of the Messiah, right? That this that the world will eventually be a better place, and the suffering will end, right? So you see that song also included in many Haggadot, right? Because ultimately it's a sign that in the darkest times, those are the times to remember to be hopeful. So they go together. Now in this Haggadah, this is a different night, which is the one that we use at Sinai for the second night community Seder, and I've used it my own for many, many years. So they include the traditional pour out your fury, but then they also have, if you can see this, the section below it says, pour out your love on our righteous allies, right? I'm going to read that, what that says. It says, pour out, here, let me just, all right, so it says, pour out your love on the nations who have known you and on the kingdoms who call upon your name, for they show loving kindness to the seed of Jacob, and they defend your people Israel from those who would devour them alive. May they live to see the sukkah of peace spread over your chosen ones and to participate in the joy of your nations. Right? Very lovely, very universalist. Right? So I'm going to read the comment on the side here. This unique addition to a medieval Haggadah appears side by side with Pour Out Your Wrath, the Shvo Chamacha, in a manuscript from Worms, 1521, attributed to the descendants of Rashi. Right?
Really?
Wouldn't that be lovely if the descendants of Rashi composed that? Scholars today debate its authenticity, but its sentiment for righteous Gentiles is genuine, right? So that scholars debate its authenticity is an understatement. It's a forgery. It was a forgery by a known forger in the late 60s who claimed to have seen a manuscript from a 1521 Haggadah, which he no longer has. and this is somebody who was known to make a lot of stuff up. So, but the sentiment doesn't mean that it's not something, yeah, that doesn't mean that the sentiment is not meaningful. But this idea of a kind of this universal type of orientation to the Seder is very modern, right? It's not something that we really saw until probably the 20th century.
Interesting. Hmm.
All right, but I guess we started by talking about Elijah.
Wow.
Right?
So
but that's Elijah's role in a lot of these stories as well, right? So you've got this, you got a poor couple that doesn't have children, and they're, they can't make ends meet, and Elijah comes and they're nice to him anyways, and then he blesses them, and they, they find a fortune, or they have a child, or whatever that, there's a lot of stories like that where Elijah plays that role of being the kind of this hidden herald of blessing and of redemption.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was interesting.
You're welcome.
If you don't mind, I just go back since the Haggadah isn't set in stone. And so if the pour out your wrath paragraph is added at a time of the 14, it didn't come from Sinai. No. Why can't we eliminate that? You know what I'm saying? It's not like it's so important and so beautiful that we want to keep it. It's just a historical blip.
Well, I wouldn't call it a blip, because once it was added, it remained, right? For me, I find it very meaningful. The idea of, that, Jews have been targeted, for the last 2,000 years, and that's certainly still an issue in the world today. To kind of preserve that, that memory and know where it came from and why it came from there. That's meaningful to me. Certainly, I also am. And maybe this is my own kind of modern take. I'm always reassured by when we call upon God to punish the wicked, rather than calling upon ourselves to punish the wicked, right? I think when people start to claim it upon themselves to just decide who is deserving and who is not deserving, I think we run into trouble. But to say that we pray and we have hope that eventually those who are wicked will in fact cease to exist. I leave that in God's hands. but ultimately, I think this part of the service it has been taken to be really, I think it's a message of hope in dark times.
Which is where we're at right now,
Yeah.
in many ways.
Now, but in keeping with the idea that the Haggadah has changed and developed over the years, to add something is also legitimate. Right? In fact, we're supposed to be innovating and adding things. We're not supposed to be locked into the printed text. That's very, very clear from the.
Yeah, I'd like to see something right now as it relates to Asian hate.
Yeah.
You know, that we could add that in to our Haggadah experience, even though I know we're predominantly addressing Jewish tradition, but you know, there are things going on.
Yeah, and I mean, and people do that. I mean, it's like throughout the 20th century and into today, people have been finding ways to have the traditions in the Haggadah speak to contemporary issues.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Yeah. What made you choose the version that you are currently using of the Haggadah? Because I know there's so many versions.
The best version. I mean, there may be some good ones that have come along since, but I think it's a great Haggadah for a community Seder because it's well laid out. It's got lots of good explanations. It's got a lot transliterated. And so, yeah, the price is like, when you buy it in bulk, I think it's like $5 or $6 a copy. So it's, and it's the full Haggadah as well. So it gives the flexibility to do everything or to, to not necessarily do everything, but that flexibility is built in. It's,
Did you buy it online and have it just be a download?
It's published by Haggadahs Are Us. And I mean, they've done a lot of really great stuff over the years. They've come up with several different versions of kind of similar types of things to this Haggadah. They've got anyways, if you go to their website, Haggadahs Are Us, two G's, and you'll see they've got a lot of great stuff.
Great.
But every year, there's probably a dozen new Haggadot that get published every single year. So there's always something good. But I just find this to be very user friendly for people of a variety of backgrounds and skills.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach. Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Wow.